I was stirring a fragrant minestrone, the kitchen air thick with herbs and simmering vegetables, when Serafina Dubois, my daughter-in-law, struck my head with a metal ladle. The blow sent a jolt of pain through my skull, a searing heat against my temple where the hot metal had made contact. "Who cooks like that, you incompetent?" Serafina shrieked, her voice a grating discord in the quiet hum of the house. I stumbled back, my hand flying to the throbbing spot, the ladle still clutched in her hand like a weapon. From the living room, I heard the television. My son, Julian, was there. He simply turned up the volume, the sound of a game show laugh track swelling, as if he hadn't heard, as if it didn't matter. 5 minutes later, a deafening crash came from the kitchen. Pots, dishes, my body hitting the floor. Julian ran over, his face already pale, and froze in the doorway. "Mom, what did you do?" he whispered, looking at me sprawled among the wreckage of my own dignity. But what neither of them knew in that moment was that I still had one last card hidden. A card that would change everything. My name is Ilara Vance. I am 71 years old, with hands calloused by decades of kneading bread for others, and a heart that until recently believed blindly in family loyalty. What a fool I was, how blind I had been. 6 months ago, I buried my husband, Silas. 50 years of marriage, a tapestry woven with shared laughter, quiet comfort, and unwavering support, evaporated one April afternoon when his heart decided to give up while he was watering the geraniums in the backyard. I found him there, on his knees, the hose still dripping water onto his worn leather shoes, a serene expression on his face, as if he had simply fallen asleep amidst the blooms he loved so much. Since that day, my world became silence and yellowing photographs. I was left alone in a house that was too big, surrounded by memories that hurt to touch, echoing with a presence that was no longer there. The scent of his pipe tobacco lingered in the study, his reading glasses still rested on the nightstand, and every corner held pieces of us that now felt like shards. Julian, my only son, insisted that I move in with him and his wife. "You can't be alone, Mum. At your age, it's dangerous." He sounded genuinely worried over the phone, his voice laced with the concern I had always cherished. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. The loneliness in Silas's big house was a physical ache, a cold emptiness that settled deep in my bones. So, I packed my life into 4 suitcases, each one heavy with not just clothes, but the weight of a past I was leaving behind. I left the house where I raised my son, where Silas and I used to dance in the kitchen on Sundays to old jazz records, where every corner held pieces of us. It felt like tearing a page from a book, knowing I could never go back to that chapter. Julian's house was modern, with gleaming polished concrete floors and furniture that looked straight out of a minimalist magazine spread, all sharp angles and muted tones. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it felt cold, impersonal. Serafina, my daughter-in-law, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows remained arched in what seemed like perpetual skepticism. "Welcome, Ilara," she said, without calling me mother-in-law, without calling me mom. Just Ilara, as if I were a stranger, a casual acquaintance, an intruder in her pristine domain. From that very first day, a chill settled over me, a premonition that I had made a profound mistake, but it was too late to go back. My old house was already listed, the keys handed over to a real estate agent. There was nowhere else for me to go. I settled into the guest room, a small, meticulously organized space at the end of the hall, with a window that overlooked a dark, narrow alley. It felt more like an afterthought than a welcoming space. I carefully hung Silas's photographs on the wall, creating a small, familiar shrine in this alien environment. I neatly arranged my sensible grey dresses in the closet, trying to make myself invisible. That, I soon learned, was my new role, existing without being in the way, a ghost in a house of the living. Mornings began early. I rose at 6 o'clock before the sun had fully chased away the night. I brewed coffee, the rich aroma a small comfort, and made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, perfectly toasted sourdough, freshly squeezed orange juice. Julian came down first, always in a hurry, always absorbed in his phone, his thumb a blur across the screen. "Thanks, Mom," he would mumble, a fleeting acknowledgement, without ever looking up. Serafina appeared later, typically wrapped in a luxurious green silk robe that shimmered with her every movement, her dark hair perfectly styled, even at that ungodly hour. She sat at the sleek marble island and scrutinized every detail of my work with critical, assessing eyes, as if evaluating a culinary performance rather than a meal prepared with care. "The coffee is watery," she would state, her voice flat, devoid of warmth. "The eggs have too much salt." Never a thank you, never an acknowledgement of effort, only a relentless critique. I just nodded, offered a small, placating smile, and tried again the next day, striving for an impossible perfection. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be needed. I wanted to believe I still had a place in my son's life, a purpose beyond simply existing. Days bled into weeks, each one a repetitive cycle of domestic tasks. I cleaned, cooked, did the laundry, pressing Julian's shirts with a precision I once reserved for Silas's Sunday best. I became a shadow moving through the house, picking up invisible crumbs, folding towels into immaculate squares, tidying spaces no one else seemed to notice. Serafina worked from home, always on what she described as important calls, always stressed, her voice carrying a thin edge of irritation. When something went wrong in her day, a dropped call, a missed deadline, a minor inconvenience, I was the easiest, most convenient target. "Why did you leave this here?" she would snap, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at a stray teacup I had forgotten on a side table. "You can't do anything right." Julian was present during these moments, often within earshot, but he never said a thing. He just looked the other way, retreated behind his laptop screen or the newspaper, as if it wasn't his problem, as if I wasn't his mother. His silence was a constant, dull ache, more painful than any of Serafina's sharp words. There were nights when I stayed awake, listening to the wall clock tick every second, each beat a tiny hammer against my heart. I wondered what I had done wrong. Where had I failed as a mother? Why did my son allow me to be treated this way? The questions circled endlessly in my mind, a tormenting carousel of regret and confusion. Tears fell silently onto my pillow, soaking the linen, and I dried them before dawn, before anyone could see, because I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't give them a reason to get rid of me, to confirm Serafina's unspoken belief that I was a burden. But that afternoon, while I was preparing the vegetable minestrone that Julian loved so much as a boy, a recipe that had once brought a smile to his face, something inside me simply broke. I was chopping carrots with careful precision, focused on making everything perfect, each vegetable a tiny, vibrant jewel, when Serafina burst into the kitchen like a hurricane. Her presence was always an intrusion, a sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice already edged with that sharp, critical tone I knew too well. "Minestrone for dinner," I replied softly, my back still to her, trying to keep my voice steady, unprovoked. "Julian's favorite recipe." She moved closer, peered into the steaming pot, and her perfectly made-up face twisted in disgust. "This looks like pig slop. How much salt did you put in? Are you trying to poison us?" Her words were not just an insult to my cooking, but daggers aimed directly at my heart. I tried to explain, to offer a defense, but she wouldn't listen. She never did. She grabbed the metal ladle from the pot, the very one I had been using, and before I could react, before my mind could even register the impending danger, she slammed it against my head. The blow left me stunned, a sudden explosion of white light behind my eyes. I felt the intense, concentrated heat of the metal, the boiling liquid of the soup running down my hair, scalding my scalp, the sharp, searing pain in my temple. "Who cooks like that, you incompetent?" Serafina screamed, her voice echoing throughout the sterile, unforgiving house. I stumbled, clutching the edge of the stove for support, my legs suddenly weak beneath me. From the living room, I heard the television. Julian was there. He could hear everything, every word, every shout, and he just turned up the volume, drowning out my pain with manufactured laughter. That was the moment something inside me went out. The physical pain, sharp and immediate, was nothing compared to the profound, crushing betrayal of that silence, of that deliberate act of turning away. My son, the boy I carried in my womb, whom I raised with every ounce of love and sacrifice I possessed, chose the sound of a TV show over my suffering. He chose to be an accomplice to my humiliation. I stood there, leaning heavily against the stove, the ladle still dripping minestrone onto the gleaming tile floor at my feet. Serafina looked at me with those cold, contemptuous eyes, waiting for me to apologize, to kneel, to beg her forgiveness for existing, for breathing, for taking up space in her perfect life. But I could only think of Julian, of how the television volume had increased just as she screamed, of how he knew exactly what was happening and chose not to see it, chose not to act. "You're pathetic," Serafina spat, crossing her arms over her chest, her posture radiating disdain. "Look at this mess. You can't even make a damn soup. I don't know why Julian insisted on bringing you here. You're a burden, a useless person just taking up space." Every word was a slap, a brutal confirmation of my worthlessness in her eyes. I wanted to answer, to defend myself, to scream back, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my throat, choked by unshed tears and a sudden paralyzing rage. I tried to clean up, to collect the scattered drops of soup from the floor, but my hands were trembling uncontrollably. My head was throbbing where the ladle had hit me, a dull, insistent ache. Serafina stormed out of the kitchen, her high heels clicking sharply on the concrete floor, leaving me alone amid the steam and the deafening silence. 5 minutes. That was all it took for me to make a decision. I looked at the pots, pristine and perfectly aligned on the stove. I looked at the dishes, carefully stacked in the drainer. I looked at that kitchen, a space I had tirelessly cleaned every day for months, trying to earn a place in this house that was never truly mine. And something inside me simply exploded. It wasn't planned, it wasn't calculated. It was a raw, primal scream of pure survival instinct, a desperate act of reclaiming some small piece of myself. I grabbed the largest pot, the one containing the minestrone she had criticized so savagely, and emptied its contents into the sink. The hot liquid ran down the drain with an almost violent sound, a gurgle of defiant release. Then I grabbed another pot, a heavy stainless steel one, and another, a ceramic casserole dish. I let them fall, some onto the pristine floor, others against the polished kitchen counter. The plates slipped from my hands, shattering with a satisfying crash. The cups splintered, shards flying. Cutlery flew through the air, clattering like hailstones. It was a chaotic, liberating, necessary clamor. Each breakage, each shattering sound was a piece of my broken pride, my suppressed anger, my unacknowledged pain finding release. I heard Julian's hurried footsteps. "What was that?" he shouted from the hallway, his voice laced with alarm. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes wide, his face drained of all color as he saw me there, standing amidst the chaos, surrounded by overturned pots, spilled minestrone, and broken dishes. There was a thin trickle of blood on my temple where the ladle had hit me, stark against my grey hair. "Mum, what did you do?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, but he didn't come closer. He didn't touch me. He just looked at me as if I were to blame for everything, as if I had orchestrated this destruction purely out of malice. Serafina appeared behind him, her expression of horror quickly morphing into pure, unadulterated fury. "She's crazy! Your mother is completely insane," she shrieked, pointing at me as if I were a dangerous animal, an unpredictable threat. "Look at this mess. She destroyed my entire kitchen. Call someone, Julian. This woman needs to be locked up." Julian looked at me. I looked back at him, my eyes pleading, hoping he would say something, anything, that he would defend me, that he would at least ask why I had done this, what had pushed me to this brink. But he just shook his head, a look of profound disappointment, of shame, clouding his features. "Mom, why? Why do you do these things? Why?" I repeated, and my voice sounded hoarse, broken, raw. "Your wife hit me with a boiling ladle, Julian. She hit me. And you turned up the television volume." The words came out like knives, sharp and precise, aimed directly at the wound he had inflicted. He blinked, confused, or perhaps feigning confusion. "I didn't hear it, Mum. I didn't know what—" "Liar." The word hung between us like poison, thick and suffocating. "You were there. You heard everything, and you chose to do nothing." Serafina stepped between us, her face red with rage, her body language a barrier. "I won't tolerate this. I won't live under the same roof as this ungrateful old woman who respects nothing. Julian, you have to choose. Either she leaves or I do." Her ultimatum hung in the air, cold and definitive. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. I looked at my son, begging him with my eyes to choose me, to remember who raised him, who spent sleepless nights by his side when he had a fever, who worked 2 jobs to pay for his college tuition, who had loved him unconditionally his entire life. But Julian was looking at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, defeated, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, Mum," he finally mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, an apology that felt hollow, directed more at his own discomfort than at my pain. "But I think it's better if you look for somewhere else. This isn't working. You're causing problems. You need to leave." The world stopped. My heart stopped. Everything stopped. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of all emotion. "Your wife hits me, and you kick me out. It's not like that, Mum. It's just that Serafina and I need our space. You need your independence. It will be better for everyone." He spoke in rehearsed phrases, empty words that someone else, undoubtedly Serafina, had put in his mouth. My son wasn't there anymore. Only a stranger with his face remained. "When?" I asked, feeling the tears start to burn behind my eyes, held back by a fragile thread of dignity. "Tomorrow morning. I'll call you a taxi. You can stay in a hotel while you find something permanent. I'll help you with some expenses." He was dismissing me like an incompetent employee, a problem to be neatly tidied away. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed in that small, impersonal guest room, looking at Silas's photographs, wondering what he would say if he could see me now. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on me, heavy with unspoken questions and profound sorrow. I packed my things slowly, methodically, folding each item carefully, as if external order could contain the internal chaos, the storm raging within my chest. At dawn, I heard the taxi horn, a harsh summons in the quiet morning. Julian was waiting for me at the door, with $200 in his hand, a meager offering that felt like an insult after everything. "For you to settle in," he said, still unable to meet my gaze. I didn't hug him. I didn't say goodbye. I just took the money, grabbed my suitcases, now heavier than ever, and left that house without looking back, walking away from the life I thought I had, the family I thought I belonged to. The taxi driver, a young man with kind eyes, asked me where I wanted to go. I had no answer. "To any cheap motel," I finally told him, my voice barely a whisper. He took me to a place on the outskirts of the city, one of those roadside hotels with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled perpetually of dampness and stale cigarettes. The room cost $30 a night. I did the math in my head. With $200, I could survive for less than a week. The reality was a cold slap. The motel room was small, with stained beige walls and a bed that creaked ominously every time I moved. There was a window overlooking the parking lot, where cars came and went at all hours of the night, their headlights sweeping across the room. The neon light of the motel sign flickered every few seconds, bathing everything in a sickly, reddish glow. I sat on that bed, surrounded by my 4 suitcases, and for the first time in months, I cried without restraint. They weren't silent tears. They were deep, racking sobs that came from some dark, cavernous place in my chest. Years of accumulated pain, swallowed humiliations, unspoken words, all poured out of me. I cried for Silas, who had left, leaving me alone in a world I no longer recognized. I cried for Julian, the child who once hugged me tight and called me his hero. I cried for myself, for the woman I had been, and who now didn't know who she was. When the tears finally dried, only the emptiness remained, a vast, desolate landscape within me. I looked at myself in the small bathroom mirror under the cruel fluorescent light. A 71-year-old woman stared back at me. Deep wrinkles etched around my eyes, now swollen and red. My grey hair was messy, disheveled. There was a faint, purple mark on my temple where the ladle had hit me, a brand of my humiliation. I touched the wound gently and felt how the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the other pain, the one without a name, the one that resided in my soul. The days began to blur into an indistinguishable haze. I stayed in the room, watching television without really seeing it. The meaningless images, a background hum to my despair. I ate the bare minimum, my appetite long gone. I only went out to buy something from the vending machine in the hallway. Salty chips, lukewarm instant coffee, dry granola bars. Once, the machine swallowed my last $2 without giving me anything in return. I stood there, watching the money disappear, and felt it was a perfect metaphor for my life. Everything I offered was taken, and I was left with nothing. I sent messages to Julian. At first, I tried to be dignified. "Son, I need to talk to you." Nothing. Then I tried to be more direct. "Julian, I'm running out of money." Silence. Finally, I stopped trying. The messages were marked as read, but there was never a response. It was like shouting into a bottomless pit, the echo of my own voice the only reply. A week later, the money ran out. The motel receptionist, a man in his 40s with a prominent belly and tired, indifferent eyes, knocked on my door. "Ma'am, I need you to pay or vacate the room." His voice wasn't cruel, just professional, indifferent, accustomed to such requests. I explained my situation, begged for one more day, but he just shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Those are the rules." I packed my suitcases again, 4 suitcases that now weighed like corpses, heavy with the remnants of a life that no longer existed. I dragged them through the parking lot under a scorching sun, not knowing where to go. a profound and terrifying void ahead of me. I walked for hours. My feet ached, blisters forming. My hands were raw and blistered from carrying so much weight, the straps digging into my flesh. But I kept going, because stopping meant accepting that I had nowhere to go, that I was truly, irrevocably, alone. I ended up in a sprawling public park near downtown. There were worn metal benches under ancient oak trees, pigeons, sardines, pecking at scattered crumbs, children playing on swings, their joyous laughter a sharp contrast to my internal torment. I sat on a secluded bench, hidden behind a thick hedge, and watched life continue as if I didn't exist, a ghost in plain sight. A woman passed with her young daughter. The little girl looked at me curiously, her innocent gaze lingering, but her mother pulled her hand, quickening her pace, as if poverty were contagious, something to be avoided. That was my first night sleeping on the street. I didn't really sleep. I stayed seated, clutching my purse to my chest, startled by every noise, every shadow. There were other homeless people in the park, mostly men, who huddled under cardboard, their forms indistinct in the dim light. One of them, a man with a kind, weathered face, approached me. "Eat it, Grandma. You have to be careful out here," he said, offering me a piece of stale bread wrapped in a napkin. I took the bread with trembling hands and thanked him, my voice thick with emotion. He nodded, a silent understanding passing between us, and walked away, dragging a large bag full of cans. The days turned into a brutal survival routine. I searched for food in the dumpsters behind restaurants. At first, I was disgusted. The stench, the grime, the shame. But hunger, I discovered, is stronger than pride. I found day-old bread, bruised fruits, leftovers that people had left on their plates. I ate hidden in alleys, behind dumpsters, where no one could see me, trying to retain some semblance of dignity in the face of utter degradation. There was a small church a few blocks away that served soup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I lined up with dozens of other people, all with broken stories etched on their faces, their eyes reflecting a similar despair. A young volunteer, her face radiant with compassion, served me the bowl with a gentle smile that, paradoxically, made me feel even smaller, more visible in my shame. "God bless you," she would say. I just nodded, unable to form words, my throat tight with a lump of unshed tears. Nights were the worst. Cold, long, and full of a pervasive fear. I lay on the hard park bench with my suitcases arrayed around me like sentinels, using my thin sweater as a makeshift blanket against the chill. I heard distant sirens, occasional shouts, the constant, indifferent hum of the city that never slept. I thought about Julian, lying in his comfortable, heated house, tucked into his soft bed, while I shivered under the cold, indifferent stars. I wondered if he thought about me, if he cared, if he even knew his mother was sleeping on the street. One morning, a police officer woke me with his flashlight, its beam a sudden, harsh intrusion. "Ma'am, you can't stay here. You have to move." I explained that I had nowhere to go, my voice raspy from disuse. He sighed, tired of hearing stories like mine, weary of the endless tide of human suffering. "There's a shelter 6 blocks away. Go there." He gave me the address and left, his duty done. I tried to go, dragging my heavy suitcases, but the shelter was full. "Come back early tomorrow," they told me. Always tomorrow. Always wait. Never now. 2 weeks passed like this. Or maybe 3. I lost count. The days blurred into a hazy continuum of exhaustion and hopelessness. My clothes were dirty, stained, my hair greasy, my skin covered in grime. I had become one of those invisible people that everyone avoided looking at, a statistic, a shadow, a forgotten piece of the city's underbelly. But in the midst of all that suffering, something strange happened. I started to remember things I had forgotten, fragments of a life long buried under the demands of family. I remembered that before I married Silas, I wanted to study literature, to immerse myself in words and stories. I remembered that I once won a poetry contest in school, a small, forgotten triumph. I remembered that there was a time when I had my own dreams, my own aspirations, before becoming a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a shadow. One afternoon, while searching through my suitcases for a clean blouse, a futile exercise as there were none, I found an envelope I didn't remember packing. It was old, yellowed at the edges, with my name, Ilara, written in Silas's unmistakable, elegant handwriting. My heart leaped, a sudden, unexpected flutter of hope in my desolate chest. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, beautifully penned, and several folded documents. The letter began, "My dearest Ilara." I immediately recognized when he had written it. It was from 2 years ago, when Silas had been hospitalized with pneumonia, a severe bout that had truly frightened us both. I thought it had just been a scare, a moment of vulnerability. But now I understood that he had faced his own mortality, stared it down, and prepared for a future without him. "If you are reading this, my love, it means I am no longer with you," the letter said, his voice resonating in every word, a ghostly comfort. "Forgive me for not telling you everything while I was alive. I always wanted to shield you from the worries of money, of business, of legal complexities, believing I was protecting you. But now I see it was a mistake to keep you in the dark." My eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of a complex mix of love, regret, and dawning understanding. "For the last 30 years, Silas's elegant script continued, I made investments, small at first, then larger. I bought properties when no one wanted them, in neighborhoods that later became valuable. I saved every extra cent. I did it all thinking about our future, about your security. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry, because I wanted to surprise you in our old age with the peace of mind of knowing you would be well taken care of, free from any financial burdens." My breathing quickened, a sudden, frantic rhythm. I unfolded the documents that accompanied the letter. They were deeds, property titles, investment certificates. My eyes scanned the papers, unable to believe what they were seeing. An apartment building downtown. Another one in the northern area. Company stocks, bank accounts with numbers that seemed impossible, zeros stretching on and on. My hands were trembling so much that the papers almost fell to the ground. I read each document once, twice, 3 times, trying to process the sheer volume of information. There were 13 properties listed, all in my name. 13. Entire buildings, individual apartments, commercial spaces. And one of those addresses was painfully familiar. Magnolia Street, number 452. It was the building where Julian and Serafina lived. The building where I had been kicked out, where I had been humiliated, hit, and discarded like trash, was mine. It had been mine all this time. I felt something churn in my stomach, a dizzying sensation. It wasn't just surprise. It was a potent mixture of disbelief, pain, and something darker, colder, that was slowly beginning to grow within me, a seed of furious indignation. Silas's letter continued on the second page. "Contact the lawyer, Alistair Finch. He has all the original documents and will help you with everything. His number is at the end of this letter. Ilara, my love, never let anyone make you feel less than you are. You are a strong, capable, valuable woman. If someone treats you badly, remember that you have the power to defend yourself. I loved you every day of my life. Take care, your Silas." I sat on that park bench, surrounded by my suitcases, by the detritus of my discarded life, holding the proof that I was not the destitute, forgotten woman everyone saw passing by. I was the owner of an estate valued at millions of dollars, millions, and I had been sleeping on the street, eating from the garbage, begging for crumbs. The irony was so brutal, so exquisitely cruel, that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. I laughed like a madwoman, a harsh, guttural sound, as tears streamed down my dirty cheeks, mingling with the grime. People passing by looked at me with pity or fear, quickly moving away from the crazy old woman in the park. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe I still was. But now I knew something they didn't. I searched through my meager belongings until I found a payphone that still worked, miraculously untouched by vandalism. I dialed the number for the lawyer, Alistair Finch, with trembling fingers. It rang 3 times before a professional, crisp voice answered. "Finch and Associates Law Firm. How may I help you?" "I need to speak with the lawyer, Alistair Finch," I said, my voice hoarse, broken from weeks of barely using it. "It's about Silas Vance." There was a brief pause. "Who is speaking, please?" "I am Alara Vance, Silas's widow." Another pause, longer this time, filled with a sudden, palpable shift in tone. "Mrs. Vance, we have been trying to contact you for months. Where are you? Mr. Finch urgently needs to see you." I gave them the park's address, the exact bench I was sitting on. They told me they would send a car in less than 30 minutes. I returned to my bench and waited, clutching those documents as if they were the only real, tangible thing in the world. Maybe they were. The car that arrived was a sleek black sedan, elegant and understated, with tinted windows that concealed its occupants. The driver, a young man in a sharp suit, got out and looked at me with a neutral, professional expression, as if picking up dishevelled homeless women were part of his daily routine. "Mrs. Vance?" I nodded. He efficiently loaded my 4 suitcases into the trunk and opened the back door for me. The interior smelled of fine leather and expensive air freshener. I felt dirty, out of place, but I didn't care anymore. A strange resolve had settled over me. The law firm was in the financial district, in one of those gleaming glass buildings that reflected the sky like a giant mirror. We went up in a silent, swift elevator to the 15th floor. The receptionist, a poised woman with perfectly styled hair, looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dishevelled appearance. But she didn't say anything. She just pointed down a plush, hushed hallway. "Mr. Finch is waiting for you in his office." Alistair Finch was a man in his late 50s, with perfectly combed grey hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and thin-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He stood up when I entered, and for a split second I saw surprise flicker across his face at my state, at the stark contrast between his elegant office and my appearance, but he quickly replaced it with a professional, composed expression. "Mrs. Vance, please have a seat. Can I offer you water? Coffee? Something stronger?" "Water, please," I managed, my voice still barely a whisper. He poured a glass from a crystal carafe and handed it to me. I drank it in long, desperate gulps, as if I hadn't had clean water in days, which, in a way, was true. "Mrs. Vance, we have been trying to locate you since Mr. Silas passed away," Mr. Finch began, his voice calm and reassuring. "We left messages at your old house. We sent letters. Your son told us you had moved, but he didn't provide us with a contact address or number." "My son," the words came out bitter, acrid. "My son kicked me out of his house 3 weeks ago. I've been living on the street." The lawyer frowned, a genuine crease forming between his eyebrows. "I understand. I am very sorry to hear that, but I want you to know that your financial situation is very, very solid. Your husband was an extremely foresightful man. Have you reviewed the documents he left you?" I took the wrinkled envelope from my purse and placed it on his immaculate desk. "I found them yesterday. I don't understand everything they say. Alistair looked them over carefully, his expression unreadable. Ah, I see. These are duplicates. I have the certified originals here, secured in our vault. Allow me to explain your current situation, Mrs. Vance. You are the owner of 13 properties in this city, valued at approximately $8 million in total. Additionally, you have investments in various funds and stocks worth an additional $2 million. Your husband also left you 3 bank accounts with readily available cash of approximately $500,000. The numbers floated in the air like something unreal, incomprehensible. $10 million. $10 million. And I had been searching for food in dumpsters. It can't be real, I whispered, the words barely audible. It is completely real, Mrs. Vance. And there's something else you should know. One of the buildings you own is on Magnolia Street, number 452. According to our records, your son, Julian Vance, and his wife, Serafina Dubois, occupy apartment 301 in that building. Is that correct? I nodded slowly, a dawning comprehension chilling me to the core. That's correct. Then you should know that they have been living there under a reduced rent contract that your husband granted them 5 years ago. They pay barely $400 monthly for an apartment that would be worth $2,500 on the current market. It was a family favor, a gesture of generosity that Mr. Silas granted them. $400. Julian was paying a pittance to live in a luxury apartment, thanks to his father's generosity. And he had kicked me out onto the street. He had left me with nothing, believing me to be destitute. The raw injustice of it burned through me. The lawyer continued speaking, explaining intricate details about taxes, property management, legal complexities, but I barely listened. My mind was processing something else, something much more fundamental. Can I cancel that contract? I asked suddenly, interrupting him, my voice firmer than I expected. Alistair stopped, removing his glasses, and looked at me attentively. You are the owner, Mrs. Vance. You can do whatever you wish with your properties. However, there are legal procedures we must follow. You can't simply evict them without proper notice. I don't want to evict them yet. The words came out cold, calculated, like polished stones. I want them to adjust their rent to the market price. $2,500, you said. Have them pay that. The lawyer nodded slowly, a flicker of something that looked like approval in his eyes. That is absolutely within your rights. We would have to notify them 30 days in advance about the change in contract terms. Are you sure you want to proceed? Completely sure. Alistair took notes on his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Very well. I will prepare the necessary documents immediately. Now, Mrs. Vance, there are more immediate matters we must attend to. Your housing situation, for example. You have several options. You can move into any of your unoccupied properties, or I can help you find a temporary place while you decide what to do, Kurt. I want to see the other buildings, all of them. I want to know exactly what I own, of course. We can organize visits starting tomorrow. In the meantime, allow me to arrange a hotel room for you, an appropriate place where you can rest and recover. He stood up and made a quick call, speaking in hushed, efficient tones. In minutes, everything was coordinated. A 5-star hotel downtown, an executive suite, all paid for from my own account. Before I left, Alistair handed me a sleek platinum bank card. This has access to one of your checking accounts. There are $50,000 available for immediate expenses. Use what you need. And Mrs. Vance, one more thing. Your husband asked me to tell you something if you ever came to see me under difficult circumstances. He made me promise. He took a sealed envelope from a drawer, its edges crisp. He told me verbatim, if my Alara comes to you beaten down by life, give her this and tell her that I always knew she was stronger than she thought she was. I took the envelope with hands that, to my surprise, no longer trembled so much. I opened it right there, in front of the lawyer. It was another letter from Silas, this one shorter, written in bold black ink on thick, luxurious paper. My love, if you are reading this, it means someone hurt you enough that you sought help. I know your pride. I know how hard it is for you to ask for anything. But I want you to know one thing. I built all this for you. Every property, every investment, every penny saved was thought of for the day when I would be gone, and you would need to defend yourself. Don't let anyone, not even our own blood, make you feel small. You're a giant, Alara. You always were. Now prove it. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read. A different kind of tears this time. Tears of revelation, of a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Alistair had the delicacy to look away, pretending to review some papers, granting me a moment of privacy. I folded the letter carefully and put it away with the other one. Silas had known. Somehow he had known that one day I would need this, that I would need a shield, an armor, a castle of my own. The hotel was everything my life had ceased to be. Soft carpets that muffled every sound, sheets that smelled faintly of lavender, a bathroom with a massive marble tub, gleaming fixtures. I stood in the middle of the executive suite for several minutes, just looking, taking it all in. It seemed unreal. 24 hours ago, I was sleeping on a park bench, my only possessions, my 4 suitcases. Now I was in a room that cost $300 a night, a world away. The first thing I did was take a bath. I filled the tub with hot water to the brim, adding fragrant bath salts I found on the counter, and submerged myself completely. The water darkened with weeks of grime, a visual representation of the burden I was shedding. I scrubbed my skin until it tingled, almost hurt, washed my hair 3 times, removing every trace of the street from my body. When I got out, I wrapped myself in a plush white robe that hung behind the door. It was so soft, so luxurious, it almost made me cry again, but this time from a profound, overwhelming sense of comfort. I ordered room service, a clear, restorative broth, fresh baked bread with sweet butter, succulent roast chicken, a crisp salad, and a rich chocolate dessert. When the food arrived on a cart with a pristine white tablecloth, I sat down and ate slowly, savoring every bite. It wasn't just food, it was dignity, it was power. It was proof that I still existed as something more than a shadow, more than a burden. That night, I slept 12 hours straight. I slept without being startled, without fear, without cold. I slept without the constant hum of anxiety in my chest. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the heavy curtains, painting stripes of gold across the room, and for a moment I didn't remember where I was. Then everything came back. The documents, the money, the properties, my new astonishing reality. For the next few days, Alistair took me to see each of my properties. Apartment buildings in bustling neighborhoods, commercial spaces in thriving plazas, even a small shopping center in the southern area of the city. Each place represented years of Silas's silent, diligent work, investments made with patience, foresight, and a profound, unwavering love for me. He explained how everything worked: the rental contracts, the maintenance schedules, the monthly income projections. I listened intently, asking questions, taking notes like a diligent student, absorbing every detail. The net income from all your properties totals approximately $45,000 a month, he told me one day while we were reviewing reports in his office. After taxes and maintenance costs, you are looking at an annual income of about $400,000. That's without touching the principal capital, Mrs. Vance. $400,000 a year. And I had been begging for a bowl of soup at church. The irony was still brutal, but now there was something else in its place. A cold, hard determination. A plan was forming in my mind. A cold, calculated, patient plan. Alistair, I said one afternoon, interrupting his explanation of capital gains. "I need us to make some changes, but I need them to be done discreetly, without anyone knowing that I'm the one behind it." He leaned back in his leather chair, intrigued, a slight smile playing on his lips. "What kind of changes?" "First, the building on Magnolia Street. I want to raise my son's rent to the market price as we discussed, $2,500. But I also want you to review all the other contracts in that building. If there are other special arrangements, reduced prices, favors being granted, I want everything to return to normal market rates. Everyone. I want that building to operate as a real business, not a charity organization or a personal favor bank." Alistair nodded, taking copious notes. "It can be done. Anything else?" "I want to buy new clothes. I want to change my appearance. And I want a business name, something I can use to sign documents, to appear in contracts. I don't want anyone to know that Alara Vance is the owner of all this. Not yet." "We can create a legal entity, an LLC," Alistair explained. "We choose a name, and all documents are signed under that name. You will be the hidden beneficiary. It's perfectly legal and very common in the real estate sector for privacy and liability." "Perfect," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "Call it Veritas Holdings. Truth Holdings." It felt fitting. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed. I went to exclusive beauty salons, where my hair was expertly cut and dyed, covering the harsh grey with an elegant, warm brown. I went to high-end boutiques, where attentive staff helped me choose clothes that fit me well, that made me look like the woman of resources I now was. Pearl grey dresses, earth-toned pantsuits, dark green silk blouses, cashmere sweaters. Nothing flashy, everything classy, understated elegance. I bought new glasses with modern frames that softened my features. I got a manicure, a pedicure. I learned to use a little makeup, subtly covering the deepest wrinkles, enhancing my eyes. I wasn't becoming someone else entirely. I was finding the Alara who had been buried under years of silent service, under the weight of expectations. Alistair continued to teach me. I learned to review complex financial reports, to understand intricate bank statements, to make sound business decisions. I learned quickly, discovering a part of me that had never had a chance to develop. I had spent 50 years cooking and cleaning, caring for others, but my mind was still sharp, capable, hungry for knowledge. "You have a natural talent for this, Mrs. Vance," Alistair told me one day, genuine admiration in his voice. "Your husband chose his investments well, but you have an instinct for seeing opportunities, for understanding the market. It's natural for you. Maybe it was. Maybe it always had been. But no one had ever given me the opportunity to discover it." Silas had been a good man, a loving husband, but even he had kept me in the dark about finances, believing he was protecting me. Now I understood that true power didn't come from being protected, but from having the tools to protect myself, to stand on my own 2 feet. The rent increase notices were sent to all tenants in the Magnolia Street building, signed by Veritas Holdings, legally represented by Finch and Associates law firm. The increases were justified within legal limits, but they were significant, especially for those who had been paying reduced rates for years, unaware of the generosity bestowed upon them. Alistair kept me informed of the reactions. Some tenants called furiously, others tried to negotiate, some simply accepted. "There's one apartment in particular that has called 7 times, he told me one afternoon. Apartment 301, a Julian Vance. He says he had a special contract with the former owner, that this must be a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I replied calmly, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Tell him the special contract expired with the death of Mr. Silas Vance. He must now pay the full rate or vacate. He is asking to speak with the owner directly. Tell him the owner is unavailable. All communications must go through you, Alistair." Days passed, Alistair kept me informed of the unfolding drama. Mr. Vance is trying to get a loan to cover the new rent amount. Apparently, he and his wife are living beyond their means. They have significant credit card debt, a financed luxury car. The rent increase is putting significant pressure on their finances. Good. The word came out cold, without emotion. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly, but I didn't feel guilt either. I was watching the natural consequences of the decisions Julian had made. He had chosen a wife who spent more than they earned. He had chosen to live in a luxury he could only afford thanks to his father's generosity. He had chosen to kick his mother out onto the street. Now he was seeing the price of those choices, but I wasn't finished. There were other strings to pull, other levers to move. Serafina worked as an independent consultant from home. I did a little investigating myself, using resources Alistair provided me, discreetly, of course. I discovered that one of her main clients, a mid-sized marketing firm, rented office space in another one of my properties at the South Commercial Plaza. Alistair, I said one morning, looking up from a property management report. This client who rents Unit 203 at the South Plaza, how much do they pay? He checked his files, his fingers scanning the digital data. $2,200 a month. It's a large space. Good business. They always pay on time. Raise their rent to $3,500. Alistair looked up, surprised. That is a very significant increase, Mrs. Vance. They might decide to move. Then let them move. It's my property, and I want to charge what it's worth. The client at Unit 203 did not move, but they did reduce their expenses. One of the first things they cut was contracts with external consultants, including Serafina. Alistair informed me almost casually during one of our weekly meetings, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. By the way, it seems your strategy is having side effects. The business at the South Plaza cancelled several vendor contracts. One of them was with Serafina Dubois, your daughter-in-law. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. A small, imperceptible gesture, and continued reviewing other documents. But inside, I felt something akin to satisfaction. It wasn't revenge yet. It was justice. It was the universe readjusting, removing unearned privileges, balancing the scales that had been so cruelly tipped. Weeks passed. I continued living in the hotel, studying, learning, transforming. I signed up for an online course on property management. I read books on personal finance, on investment strategies, on business ethics, books I had never had time for before. I met with other property owners that Alistair knew, listening to their stories, absorbing their experience, learning the nuances of this new world I inhabited. One afternoon, while having coffee on the hotel terrace, overlooking the bustling city below, Alistair called me. Mrs. Vance, there's a situation you need to know about. Your son, Julian, requested a hearing with the building's management. He is 2 months behind on rent. My heart gave a sharp, painful lurch, but I forced my voice to remain steady. Under standard policies, we have the right to initiate eviction proceedings, correct? That's correct. How much does he owe? $5,000 in total, plus late payment fees. $6,200 total. $6,200. I could have paid it with the money I had in my purse at that moment, but I wouldn't. Proceed with the eviction, Alistair, following all legal protocols, of course. Are you sure? Once we start, the process is public. It is filed in the courts. It will appear on his credit history, make it difficult for him to secure housing or loans in the future. I am completely sure. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of guilt or regret, but from a complex mixture of emotions that I didn't know how to name. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at the woman who stared back. She no longer looked like the stooped, broken figure who had arrived at Alistair's office 2 months ago. This woman had straight shoulders, a firm gaze, a jaw clenched with determination. This woman didn't beg. She didn't apologize for existing. This woman collected what she was owed. The following days were a whirlwind of legal activity. Alistair kept me informed of every step. The eviction notice was delivered. Julian had 30 days to pay the full debt or vacate the apartment. According to Alistair, my son had called the firm every day, sometimes several times a day, demanding to speak with the owner, asking for extensions, offering payment plans. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "What you instructed me to. That all policies apply equally to all tenants, that there are no exceptions, that if he cannot pay, he must vacate." Perfect. But there was something else Alistair didn't know. Something I had been investigating on my own. I had hired a private investigator, not to spy, but to understand. I needed to know how my son had reached this point. I needed to understand what had happened to the boy I had raised, the loving child who had vanished somewhere along the way. The report arrived a week later. It was sadder than I expected. Julian earned a decent salary as a sales manager, but Serafina spent 3 times what came in. Credit cards maxed out, personal loans to cover other loans, extravagant meals at expensive restaurants 5 times a week, designer clothes she wore once and forgot in the closet, a lifestyle built entirely on debt and appearances, a fragile facade. The investigator also included notes on their relationship. They had had public arguments. Neighbors reported frequent shouting, doors slamming, tense, suffocating silences. Serafina blamed Julian for not earning enough money. Julian blamed Serafina for spending too much. It was a vicious cycle of resentment and recriminations, a toxic dance. I read the entire report twice. A part of me, the part that was still a mother, wanted to intervene. I wanted to call Julian, offer him help, guide him toward better decisions, to somehow rescue him from this self-made trap. But the other part, the newer, stronger part, knew that would be a mistake. Julian needed to hit rock bottom. He needed to face the full, unvarnished consequences of his choices. Only then could he truly grow. Besides, he had let me hit rock bottom. He had seen me on his kitchen floor, bleeding, humiliated, and he had turned up the television volume. He had kicked me out onto the street with $200 and a vague promise of help that never materialized. He hadn't called to check if I was alive. He hadn't asked if I had somewhere to sleep. He hadn't cared. That was the truth that hurt more than any physical blow. My son had stopped caring about me long before kicking me out of his house. Maybe he had never really cared. Maybe he only saw me as an obligation, an inherited burden that he had finally found a way to discard. On day 28 of the eviction period, Alistair called me. Julian paid. He got the money somehow. He paid the full $6,200 this morning. I felt something akin to disappointment, a strange, hollow sensation. Where did he get the money? I don't know for sure, but I have a theory. There is a new charge on the credit report I monitor for the building. A personal loan from a quick loan company, 32% interest rate. He probably borrowed from there. 32% interest. Julian had exchanged one debt for a worse one, a more insidious trap. He had bought himself time, but he hadn't solved anything. I understand. Keep monitoring. Let me know of any changes. 2 weeks later, the next rent payment was due. Or rather, it wasn't. It didn't arrive. Julian was late again. This time, I didn't wait. "Start the eviction process immediately, Alistair," I told him. "No additional warnings. We apply the rules to the letter." While all this was happening in the legal and financial world, I continued with my personal transformation. I signed up for yoga classes in the mornings, not purely because I needed exercise, although that helped too, but because I needed to learn to be silent with myself, to breathe, to exist without the constant noise of serving others, of reacting to others' needs. I also started writing. I bought a beautiful brown leather notebook and an elegant fountain pen, and I wrote every night before bed. Not a diary exactly, but reflections, thoughts about who I had been, who I was now, who I wanted to be. I wrote about Silas, about our years together, about the things I never told him, the quiet moments that defined our love. I wrote about Julian, about motherhood, about how love is sometimes not enough, about the agonizing realization that you can raise a child with every fiber of your being, and they can still betray you. One afternoon, while writing on the hotel terrace, lost in thought, an elderly woman sat at the table next to mine. She must have been 80 years old, maybe more, with perfectly styled white hair and penetrating, intelligent blue eyes. "Excuse me for bothering you," she said softly, her voice raspy but kind. "But I've seen you here several times, always writing, always alone. And you remind me of myself some years ago." I smiled politely, expecting it to be a preamble to selling me something or preaching to me, but she just continued. "I also went through a late transformation in my life. After my husband died, I discovered I didn't know who I was without him. I had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, but never just myself. So I had to learn it. Is that your case too?" Her words struck me with uncomfortable precision, a direct hit to the core of my recent experience. "Something like that," I admitted, a lump forming in my throat. "The hard part isn't discovering who you are," she said, looking toward the distant horizon, her eyes filled with ancient wisdom. "The hard part is giving yourself permission to be it, especially when the person you discover is not who others expect you to be." She looked directly at me then, her gaze unwavering. "But it's worth it, dear. Completely worth it." She stood up, patted me gently on the shoulder, and left. I never knew her name. I never saw her again, but her words stayed with me, resonating somewhere deep, a beacon of understanding. She was right. The hard part wasn't discovering who Alara was without Silas, without Julian, without the role of the self-sacrificing, invisible mother. The hard part was giving myself permission to be that person. A person who collected what she was owed. A person who didn't automatically forgive. A person who set boundaries and made them be respected. The eviction process advanced relentlessly. Alistair sent me updates every 2 days. Julian had hired a cheap lawyer who tried to find technicalities to delay the inevitable. They argued that the rent increase had been excessive, that certain protocols hadn't been followed, that they deserved more time. But Alistair had done everything to the letter. Every document was in order. Every notification had been correctly delivered. There was no escape. "The eviction hearing is scheduled for next Thursday," Alistair informed me one afternoon. "It's a formality. With the documentation we have, the judge will rule in our favor. Your son will have to vacate within a maximum of 10 days after the ruling." "I'll be there," I said suddenly, surprising even myself. Alistair raised his eyebrows, surprised. "At the hearing?" "It's not necessary, Mrs. Vance. I can represent you completely. In fact, it's better if you're not present. It maintains your anonymity, your distance from the situation." "I want to be there," I insisted, my voice firm. "In the room, but not as an involved party, just as an observer." "You can," he mused for a moment. "Eviction hearings are public. Anyone can enter and sit in the back benches. As long as they don't recognize you, there's no problem." Thursday arrived with a grey sky that threatened rain, mirroring the somber mood I felt. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark grey pantsuit and an ivory silk blouse, a subtle but powerful statement. I tied my hair back in a low, elegant bun. I put on my new glasses, applied a little subtle makeup, just enough to enhance my features without being overt. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman Julian wouldn't recognize. I was no longer the stooped mother cooking soup in his kitchen, waiting for his acknowledgement. I was someone else, someone stronger, someone in control. The courthouse was an old, imposing building with hallways that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I arrived early and sat on the last bench in courtroom 3, where the hearing would take place, choosing a spot that offered a clear view of the proceedings without drawing attention to myself. There were other people waiting for their own cases, all with that anxious, tired expression that the legal system seems to produce. Julian arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled time. He came with Serafina and their lawyer, a young man in a cheap suit that had seen better days. My son looked terrible. He had lost weight, his face drawn, with deep dark circles under his eyes. His hair was messy, unkempt. Serafina, on the other hand, was perfectly groomed in an emerald green dress that was too elegant, too striking for a courthouse. High heels, impeccable makeup, but her expression was one of barely contained fury, a simmering volcano of indignation. They sat in the front row, their backs to me. I observed them as one watches a play, distant, analytical. Serafina whispered things into Julian's ear, making abrupt, agitated gestures, clearly annoyed, her voice a low, angry murmur. He just nodded, defeated, without the energy to argue. Their lawyer reviewed papers with a worried, harried expression. Alistair arrived exactly on time, immaculate in his dark suit, his leather briefcase clutched in his hand. He didn't look at me, just as we had agreed. He sat on the other side of the courtroom, organized, confident. He knew his trade and knew he had a solid case. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with a severe expression and efficient, no-nonsense movements. Case number 3478, Veritas Holdings versus Julian Vance, the clerk announced. Julian's lawyer stood up first. He argued that the rent increase had been excessive, that his client had lived in the apartment for 5 years with a good payment history, that he deserved special consideration given the circumstances. His voice sounded unconvincing, even to himself. He knew he was losing. Alistair stood up calmly. He presented the documents, the original contract, the increase notifications, the late payment notices, all perfectly organized, an undeniable paper trail. He explained that the special contract had been a courtesy of the former owner, now deceased, and that the new management had decided to normalize all rents to the market price, completely legal, completely justified. Furthermore, Your Honour, Alistair continued, his voice resonating with quiet authority, the defendant not only refused to pay the new rent amount, but accumulated 2 months of arrears. He paid under eviction pressure on one occasion, but immediately fell back into delinquency. This demonstrates a clear pattern of inability or unwillingness to fulfill his contractual obligations. The judge reviewed the documents in silence, her expression unreadable. She looked at Julian. Mr. Vance, is it correct that you currently owe 2 months' rent under the new terms? Julian stood up with difficulty, his movements stiff, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. Yes, Your Honour, but the increase was so sudden, we didn't have time to adjust. If you could give us an extension, just 3 months to— Mr. Vance, the judge interrupted him firmly, her voice sharp. You were notified 30 days in advance of the change in terms, which is what the law requires. You had sufficient time to adjust or find another place. Do you have the money owed at this moment? Julian looked at his lawyer, then at Serafina, who glared at him with undisguised contempt, then at the floor. No, Your Honour, not at this moment. Then I have no choice but to rule in favour of the plaintiff. Mr. Vance, you have 10 days to vacate the property. If you do not do so voluntarily, forced eviction will proceed. Next case. The gavel struck the table with a sharp, final sound. Everything had ended in less than 20 minutes. Julian remained paralysed in his place, his face a mask of disbelief, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. Serafina exploded. This is unfair. You can't do this. We have rights. she yelled toward the judge, her voice shrill and desperate. But it was too late. The next case was already being announced. Their lawyer took her arm, trying to get her out of the courtroom before she was charged with contempt. Serafina resisted, shouting incoherent things about corruption and abuse, a whirlwind of impotent rage. Julian followed her in silence, dragging his feet, the very image of defeat, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. They passed by my bench without looking at me. I was just another person in the room, invisible, irrelevant. I watched them until they left, their figures disappearing down the hallway. Then I stayed seated for a few more minutes, letting the reality sink in. I had won. Legally, formally, I had won. But I didn't feel the euphoria I expected. Just a kind of emptiness, like after a storm has passed, leaving behind a profound silence. I left the courthouse through a side door. Alistair had told me he would wait for me at a nearby coffee shop. I found him at a back table with 2 cups of coffee already served. "Well," he said when I sat down, a knowing look in his eyes. "It went as planned." "Yes. How do you feel?" I thought about the question, really considered it. How did I feel? Strange, I finally admitted. Like I closed a door. But I still don't know what's on the other side. Alistair nodded with understanding. "What you did today wasn't cruel, Mrs. Vance. It was just fair. Your son made decisions that led him here. You simply let him face the natural consequences of those decisions." "I know. Rationally. I know," I said, a sigh escaping my lips. "But that never changes, does it? Not even when they change." We drank coffee in silence. Alistair didn't push me to talk more. He was good at that, at knowing when silence was more useful than words. After a while, he took a folder from his briefcase. "I have to show you something. It arrived this morning, a request from one of your other tenants in the Magnolia building." I opened the folder. It was a handwritten letter addressed to Veritas Holdings. It was written by a woman named Martha Gomez, tenant of apartment 105. She explained that she was a single mother with 2 children, who worked as a nurse on the night shift, and had always paid her rent on time, even through difficult periods. She asked very respectfully if it was possible to reconsider the rent increase in her case, or at least stagger the increase over several months to allow her time to adjust. She attached copies of her payment receipts, proof of income, and glowing reference letters from her employer. I read the letter twice, my gaze lingering on the worn paper, the careful, elegant script. "What do you think?" I asked Alistair. "It's your decision. Legally, you are not obligated to make exceptions, but this woman seems genuine, and she has an impeccable payment history." I thought about Martha Gomez, whom I didn't know, working night shifts, juggling 2 children and a demanding job, simply trying to make ends meet. I thought about how many times I had been in a similar position, begging for a little consideration, a little grace, a moment of understanding from a system that often felt unyielding. "Accept her proposal," I finally said, my voice softer, more human. "Stagger the increase over 6 months, and tell her that if she continues to pay on time, we will consider keeping her rent permanently below market as a gesture of goodwill." Alistair smiled slightly, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "That is very generous, Mrs. Vance." "It's not generosity," I corrected him gently. "It's recognizing the difference between someone who is genuinely struggling and someone who is just evading responsibility. I wouldn't become Serafina, Alistair." I signed the approval right there. It was a line I had decided to draw. I would be tough on those who had hurt me, on those who abused unearned privileges. But I wouldn't become the type of person who ignores real suffering, who turns a blind eye to genuine hardship. I wouldn't become the person who chose to turn up the television volume. The following days were tense. Alistair informed me of Julian's desperate attempts to reverse the decision. He had appealed the ruling, which would only delay things by 1 more week. He had tried to get additional loans. but his credit was already ruined, a consequence of his own poor choices and Serafina's extravagant spending. He had placed ads selling furniture, electronics, anything of value. The appeal was rejected in 3 days. The appeals judge didn't even require a hearing, just reviewed the documents and confirmed the original ruling. Julian now had less than a week to vacate. According to the private investigator who was still monitoring the situation, your son and Serafina had begun packing, but the arguments between them had intensified dramatically. Neighbours report shouting every night, the investigator informed me by phone. Yesterday, Mrs. Dubois left the building with 2 suitcases and took a taxi. She hasn't returned. Apparently she's staying with a friend. And Julian? I asked, hating myself for asking, for the lingering thread of maternal concern. He's still there alone, packing. One of the neighbours says they saw him crying in the hallway last night while carrying boxes to the elevator. The image hurt more than I expected. My son, alone, crying while packing the remnants of his life, his dreams shattered. But I didn't call. I didn't intervene. This had to happen. He needed this breaking point. 2 days before the eviction deadline, Alistair received an unexpected call. It was Julian, he told me when we met that afternoon. He wants to speak with the building owner. He says he has something important to say. He's begging for a meeting. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. Did I want to see my son? Did I want to hear what he had to say? A part of me, the part that never stopped being a mother, screamed, yes. But the other part, the newer, stronger, wiser part, had doubts. Do you know what he wants to say? No, only that it's important, that he needs to explain something. I thought for a long minute. Tell him I will agree to see him, but not as his mother, as the representative of Veritas Holdings, and it has to be in a neutral place, in your office, tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. Alistair nodded. Does he want me to be present? No, I said, my voice firm. I have to do this alone. That night, I didn't sleep. I mentally practiced what I would say, how I would react, how I would control my emotions. I stood in front of the mirror and rehearsed maintaining my expression, neutral, firm, without betraying emotion. I had to be strong. I couldn't allow Julian to see the mother desperate for his love, the woman who had cried in the dark for him. He had to see the businesswoman I now was, the owner, the person who commanded respect. At 2, the next afternoon, I arrived at the law firm. Alistair had let me use his private office, a spacious room with a panoramic view of the city. I sat behind the large, imposing desk in the black leather chair, the case documents spread out in front of me, a symbolic barrier. I was dressed impeccably. A charcoal grey pantsuit, a crisp cream-coloured blouse, my hair perfectly styled, subtle but definitive makeup. I didn't look like Ilara, the grieving widow, the discarded mother. I looked like Mrs. Vance, or rather like the formidable force behind Veritas Holdings. At exactly 3 o'clock, I heard voices in the reception area. My heart started beating faster, a frantic drum in my chest, but I forced myself to remain outwardly calm. The door opened and Julian entered, alone. He stopped dead when he saw me. For an infinite moment, we looked at each other in silence. I saw his brain processing what his eyes were seeing. Confusion first, then disbelief, then a dawning, absolute shock. "Mom," he whispered, as if he were seeing a ghost, his voice a frail thread. "Sit down, Julian." My voice came out cold, controlled, devoid of the warmth he once knew. It wasn't the voice of a mother. It was the voice of an owner, a judge, an executioner of consequence. He stumbled toward the chair in front of the desk, unable to take his eyes off me, his gaze fixed, desperate. "No, I don't understand. What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like this? Where have you been? I looked for you, Mum. I called you. I sent you messages. Lies. The word cut the air like a knife, sharp and unforgiving. I checked my messages. 0 calls, 0 messages. After kicking me out of your house, you never contacted me again. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes, swollen and bloodshot, filled with tears. Serafina said it was better to give you space, that you were angry, that with time. Serafina said, I repeated, my tone icy. Julian, since when did you let your wife make decisions about your relationship with your mother? It wasn't like that. Things were complicated. Money, work. Serafina was stressed, and it was easier to forget about me than to deal with your wife. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a brutal truth. He lowered his gaze, unable to deny it, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Finally, Julian looked up, and I saw something different in his eyes, something beyond mere shock, a question forming. Mum, what are you doing here in this office dressed like this? Why did the lawyer let you use his office? I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I'm not using his office, Julian. He lent it to me because I am his client. I am Veritas Holdings. The colour drained from his face, leaving it ashen. What? The building where you live? The other 12 buildings in this city? The investments? The money? It's all mine. Your father left it to me. It was always mine. And you have been paying rent to live in my property. Julian stood up so fast that the chair almost fell over, his voice rising in disbelief. No, that's not... Dad never mentioned... Why didn't you say anything? Why would I have said anything? My voice rose slightly, allowing a little of the contained anger, the righteous fury, to surface. So you and Serafina could treat me like your landlady in addition to your maid? So you could ask for more favors, more discounts, more special considerations, knowing I had resources? We didn't know, he shouted, desperation in his voice. If we had known that you... What? I interrupted him, standing up as well, facing him across the desk, a formidable presence. Would you have treated me better? Would you have respected me more? Julian, respect shouldn't depend on how much money someone has. I was your mother. That should have been enough. He fell back into the chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders trembling. He was crying, his body racked with silent sobs. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Mum. I was a coward. I let Serafina treat you badly. I let her kick you out. I turned up the television volume when she was hurting you because I didn't want to confront her, because it was easier to sacrifice you than risk my marriage. The words I had waited months to hear had finally come out of his mouth, raw and agonizingly honest. But I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I only felt tired, and profound weariness settling deep in my bones. And now, Julian, do you only feel sorry because you discovered I have money? I asked, my voice softer but no less penetrating. Because I own the building where you live. Would you have come to apologize if you still thought I was a poor old woman with no resources, living on the street? He looked up, his face soaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. I don't know, he admitted with a broken voice, a confession of utter defeat. I don't know, Mum, and that's the worst part. I don't know what kind of person I became. I don't recognize the man who did those things, who left his mother on the street, who chose comfort over decency. At least he was honest. That was something. I sat down again, calmer, the storm within me beginning to recede. Your marriage is falling apart, isn't it? He nodded miserably. Serafina left 3 days ago. She says she won't stay with a loser who can't even pay the rent. She says she deserves better. That all this is my fault. And what do you think? I think she's right. I think I am a loser. I lost my job 2 weeks ago. I was fired for being constantly late, for being distracted. for the stress, for my performance slipping. I have debts of over $40,000. My credit is ruined, and in 2 days I'm going to be homeless. It's ironic, isn't it? I left you homeless, and now I'm in the same situation. It's not ironic, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. It's karma. He looked at me with red, swollen eyes, a flicker of defiance in their depths. Have you come to watch me suffer? Is that what you wanted? Revenge? The question stopped me. Was that what I wanted? I had spent weeks moving pieces, pulling strings, applying pressure. I had watched my son fall apart piece by piece, an architect of his own destruction. And now that he was here in front of me, completely broken, completely exposed, did I feel satisfied? No, I finally said, surprised by my own answer, by the clarity that came with it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to be discarded, ignored, treated as if you're worth nothing. I wanted you to hit rock bottom so you could start rebuilding yourself correctly, from a place of truth, not a place of false luxury and convenience. And did I achieve it? He asked with a voice barely audible, a desperate plea for validation. I hit rock bottom. What do you think? He thought for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point beyond me, beyond the office walls. I think so. I think I can't fall any lower than I am now. No job, no wife, no money, no home, no dignity. Without you. The last 2 words came out as a torn whisper, a raw admission of his profound loss. I remained silent, letting his words float between us, filling the space with their weight. Julian had reached the bottom. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his shoulders slumped, in how his hands trembled on his knees. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment my son finally understood the true weight and cost of his actions. Do you know what the worst part of it all was, Julian? I finally said, my voice quiet, almost conversational, but laden with immense pain. It wasn't the blow with the ladle. It wasn't sleeping on the street. It wasn't searching for food in the garbage. It was the sound of the television volume going up. It was knowing that my own son heard me cry out in pain and chose to do nothing. That was the real abandonment. He sobbed, covering his face with his hands, his body shaking uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, Mum. If I could go back in time. But you can't, I interrupted him, my voice firm. No one can. We can only decide what to do with the time we have left, with the person we choose to be from this moment forward. Julian looked up, hope and fear mixed in his expression, a fragile flicker. What? What's going to happen now? I leaned back in the chair, studying him, really seeing him. My son, the baby I had carried in my arms, the child who ran to me when he fell, the teenager who hugged me fiercely before going off to college. All that was still there, buried under layers of bad decisions and cowardice. But there was also the man who had betrayed me, who had discarded me. Both versions were real. The eviction proceeds, I said firmly, leaving no room for doubt. I am not going to cancel it. You need to leave that apartment. You need to leave that life behind. It's a clean break, a fresh start for you, whether you see it that way or not. His face crumbled, hope draining from it instantly. I understand. I have no right to ask you for anything. Just, can I ask you something? Where were you all those months? How did you survive before you discovered the properties? I told him. Not everything, not the full, brutal horror, but enough. The nights in the park, the hunger, the cold, the vending machine that swallowed my last dollars. Every word was a dart that I watched embed itself in him, a painful but necessary truth. He needed to hear it. He needed to understand the full cost of his abandonment. When I finished, Julian was openly weeping, not trying to hide it. I failed you in the worst possible way. Dad must be ashamed of me. Wherever he is, he must hate me for what I did to you. Your father loved you, I said softly, a maternal tenderness resurfacing despite everything, even when you made mistakes. But he also knew that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions. That's why he built this legacy for me, so I would have the resources to defend myself if I ever needed to, so I would never be helpless again. Will you ever forgive me? The question hung in the air, fragile and desperate. The truth was, I didn't know. I don't know, Julian. Forgiveness isn't something I can force. It's not a switch I flip because you finally apologized. It's a process. And first, I need to see real change, not just pretty words born of desperation. He nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand, accepting the terms. What can I do? How can I show you I've changed? It's not about showing me anything, I clarified. It's about you becoming the man you want to be. The man your father would have been proud to call his son. A man of integrity, of courage, of compassion. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over, that our time had run its course. You have 2 days to vacate. Use that time wisely. Julian stood up slowly, as if every movement cost him enormous effort, his body heavy with the weight of his revelations. At the door he stopped and turned around, his voice raw. Mum, one last thing. When I find somewhere to stay, when I manage to get my life sorted out, can I call you? Even if it's just to know you're okay. I thought about my answer carefully, weighing the implications. You can try, I finally said, my voice quiet but clear. But I don't guarantee I'll answer. Not until I see actions, not just words. Not until I see that man you described, the one your father would be proud of. He nodded, accepting the difficult terms. Thank you for seeing me, for listening to me. I know I didn't deserve it. And he left. I was left alone in the office, feeling the immense weight of what had just happened. It hadn't been the explosive confrontation I might have imagined. There were no screams or dramatic rejections, just the cold, hard truth, served on a platter of inevitable consequences. The following days were spent in a kind of emotional limbo. Alistair informed me that Julian had vacated the apartment one day before the deadline. He had left the place clean, the keys correctly handed over, a small gesture of his newfound responsibility. According to the building doorman, he had left in a taxi with only 3 suitcases and an expression of total defeat. Do you know where he went? I asked Alistair, hating myself for asking, for the lingering thread of maternal concern that still tugged at my heart. No, Mrs. Vance, he didn't say. A part of me wanted to investigate, find out where he was, make sure he at least had a roof over his head. But I held back. Julian was an adult. He needed to sort this out himself. I couldn't keep rescuing him. That phase of my life was over. Serafina, for her part, had completely disappeared. According to my sources, she had moved back in with her parents in another city, blaming Julian for everything, her sense of entitlement unwavering. She had posted things on social media about weak men and wasted time, but never mentioned her own role in the disaster. Typical. With the apartment vacant, I decided to make significant changes. I hired a talented designer, and we completely renovated the space. New floors, fresh paint, modern appliances, luxurious finishes. Apartment 301 became the jewel of the building, a testament to its true value. I rented it in less than a week to a young professional couple for $3,000 a month. But the building wasn't the only thing that needed renovation. I did, too. I decided it was time to leave the hotel and create a real home, a sanctuary of my own. I chose one of my properties, a charming small house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood with a garden that faced south, bathing it in warm sunlight. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with large windows overlooking the greenery, and a wooden deck, perfect for peaceful morning coffees. I spent weeks decorating it. I didn't hire designers this time. I wanted to do it myself, infusing it with my rediscovered sense of self. I chose simple but elegant furniture, warm colors, and textures that invited comfort. I hung Silas's photographs in the living room, but I also left ample space for new memories, new experiences. I planted fragrant roses in the garden, cherry tomatoes in pots on the deck, aromatic herbs next to the kitchen window. I enrolled in painting classes at a nearby community centre. It turned out I wasn't terrible. My first attempts were disastrous, blobs of colour without shape or meaning. But over time, I started creating things I liked. Simple landscapes, serene still lives, even self-portraits that for the first time captured who I was truly becoming, a woman of depth, resilience, and quiet strength. I also started volunteering at the shelter I had tried to visit that terrible night when I had nowhere to go, when I was truly at rock bottom. I served food twice a week. I listened to the stories of other homeless people, understanding that each one had their own unique path to despair, their own silent battles. I donated generously, but I also gave something more valuable: my time and my empathy, born of lived experience. One afternoon, while serving soup, I recognized someone. It was Remy, the man who had offered me bread that night in the park. He looked cleaner now, more hopeful, a spark returning to his eyes. "Grandma," he said, surprised, a wide smile spreading across his face. "Is that you? You look different." "I am," I replied, smiling back, a genuine, radiant smile. I found myself. 3 months passed without news of Julian. He didn't call. He didn't write. Part of me was relieved, able to breathe freely without the constant weight of his disappointment. Another part felt his absence like a wound that wouldn't quite close, a ghost of a maternal ache. But I kept going. I continued building my life, discovering who Alara was beyond being a mother, a wife, a shadow. Then, one Saturday morning, while watering the roses in my thriving garden, a burst of coral and yellow blooms, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, a flicker of apprehension before answering. "Hello? Mum. It's Julian." His voice, but different, firmer, more humble, stripped of its old entitlement. "It's me. I know you said you might not answer, but I needed to try." My heart beat faster, a sudden, unexpected flutter. "Where are you?" "In a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a studio. But it's mine. I pay for it with my new job. I'm working in a warehouse, night shift. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. I'm paying off my debts little by little." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized was there. "I'm glad to hear that, Julian." "Mum, I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said, his voice earnest. "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm going to therapy every week. I'm working on understanding why I made the decisions I did, why I let Serafina turn me into someone I don't recognize, why I let myself become a coward." "That's good, Julian. Really good." There was a pause, filled with unspoken emotion. "Do you think someday, could we maybe get a cup of coffee? It doesn't have to be soon. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready." I looked at the roses I had planted, now blooming vibrant and full. I looked at the house I had painstakingly turned into my sanctuary. I looked at the beautiful, complicated life I had built from the ashes of my past. "Maybe," I finally said, the words soft, open, tinged with a delicate hope. "Someday, when we are both truly ready." "Okay, I can wait. I've learned to be patient." His voice cracked slightly, a hint of the vulnerability he had hidden for so long. "I love you, Mum. I know I don't have the right to say it after everything, but it's true." "I know," I whispered, and I hung up. I sat on the deck with a cup of herbal tea, letting the morning sun warm my face. I hadn't completely forgiven Julian. Maybe I never would, entirely. The scars of his betrayal ran deep, but there was something more important than forced forgiveness. I had found peace. I had found my strength. I had found my voice. I had found myself. I took out my brown leather notebook and wrote, the elegant pen gliding across the page. I learned to forgive myself for waiting so long to defend myself. I learned that self-love is not selfishness. It is survival. It is dignity. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. The wind rustled the leaves on the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby, its melody clear and bright. And I, Ilara Vance, 71 years old, owner of 13 buildings, survivor of betrayal and abandonment, a woman reborn from her own ashes, simply existed, whole, free, entirely mine.